Okay, we're calling to order the educational program for city council and commissioners. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, we have one speaker and Kay.
Okay, come on up.
Sorry. So basically, just want to remind everybody, whenever you have 3 or more, planning commission or joint council, 3 or more, you have to, it's open to the public, which excludes the media. So currently, right now, you're live, and at the same time, we're recording it. The city, thankfully, is creating a public record. And so you'll be able to access that via the public record act. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to Trevor and Kellen, if you haven't all met Kellen, and they're going to teach us all about the Brand Act.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming down and spending time with us here on Wednesday. I just wanted to start out, if we could everyone just go around, introduce themselves and what commission that you're on so we all can know everybody who's here. John, if you don't mind starting.
John Mazza, Planning Commission.
Doug Stuart, council member.
Marnie Cammons, Planning Commission.
Marianne Riggins, council member.
Aylin Conrad, council member.
Norm Haney, chair of wastewater advisory committee.
Dennis.
Dennis Robert Smith, Arts Commission.
Paul Grisani, Mobile Home Rent Control.
Kevin Poffenberger, Wastewater Advisory Commission.
Pamela Conley, ULIC Arts Commission.
Kevin, you want to start this roll off?
Kevin Keegan, Public Works Commission.
Elizabeth Riddick, Planning Commission. Micah Bellsberg, Public Works Commission.
Skylar Peak, Planning.
Alexis Aria, Public Safety.
Rob Blackman, Grant Stabilization Commission.
Josh Spiegel, Safety.
Drew Leonard, Planning.
Rebecca Evans, Planning Commission Recording Secretary.
Gail Duncan, Administrative Assistant for the Planning Commission.
Kevin Shaking, Mobile Home and Stabilization Committee.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone coming down, especially you commissioners who haven't started their meetings yet. So, appreciate it. So today we're just going to go through a number of subjects that you're going to have to deal with as a commissioner. Some are educational, some are Brown Act, some are best practices. A lot of what we're going to talk about will probably focus more on the Planning Commission, since the Planning Commission has a role beyond what the other commissions do in terms of approving permits. And we'll go through sort of the fair hearing procedures and best practices to deal with that also. We'll also have time at the end for any questions anyone has, and you guys have our contact information. If you have any questions that come up during this that we don't get to, please do follow up. So, starting out here talking about sort of the structure and roles at the city, and we're in the council manager form of government. This is a form of government in California that was put through to deal with basically corruption and problems that were happening historically when council members were directly appointing staff members, and they had a lot of corruption issues, and so it creates a separation between the administration at the city and then the legislative and quasi-judicial functions of the city. And so the way the staff runs and the day-to-day is controlled by the city manager, who answers to the city council, who then gives them direction and also delivers the policies for the city and deals with any appeals or applications for permits of the city. So as a commissioner, what this means for you is that if you have anything you need or any questions, you should be reaching out to the city manager or your designated liaison. So if there's junior staff or other people that a particular planner on that you might have a question or something that you want to know, go through your liaison, because they will structure and be able to coordinate if you need to get any information or need to work with anyone else. The Planning Commission, this is a body that's authorized by state law. It's created by the City Council, and their job is to exercise their judgment and then reflect the community values in implementing the law. And they're responsible for a number of specific roles, including improving land use entitlements, and then evaluate, and they also evaluate and provide recommendations regarding changes to the municipal code and the local coastal program. In Malibu, we are more complicated than most planning commissions because our entire city is located within the coastal zone, which means every application needs to be evaluated for whether a coastal development permit is needed or not beyond just the requirements of our municipal code. And the interaction between those is very complicated, so thank you, commissioners. It is a lot of work to sort that out. and have to know 2 codes, and how they apply is a lot more than what most planning commissions have to deal with. Our other commissions are created by the city council, and their job is generally to evaluate and provide recommendations and advice to the city council. And this would be on projects or other plans, or even potential legislation, things that are put on a work plan by the city council for the commissions to deal with. And these are defined by the city council. They give the direction, and then the chair or the other designated representative, there's a portion of every regular meeting for a report from the commission. It's not for any commissioners to come and talk, it's for a report about what happened at the commission. If you guys want to have someone come and speak, there's a time on each regular meeting that the commission can designate someone to come and report what happened at the meetings. For other items, there will be sometimes more formal involvement of the commissions to be involved in presentation when there's particular projects or legislation coming through. You work with the liaison to sort of work on how that works in a particular situation. Staff's role. So staff's role is to help you out. They're to identify the law and analyze any facts, provide information needed by your commission to do your job. If you have questions, if you need to know things, that's what staff's here for. They offer their professional opinion, but you guys are the ones that make, you're taking their opinion, but you're also applying your own when you're making a recommendation. And the staff's role is they're accountable to the city manager, but they work with the commission. So other people that are involved in this is the community, and the community's role is to add insights, bring other evidence, participate, give their opinion about especially legislative items, what they think will be best for the city, or bring other things to light to aid in the commission's decisions and what they make in terms of their determinations or recommendations. When we have an application in the planning commission, the role of the applicant is to be forthcoming, to provide facts, propose projects that comply with the local coastal program municipal code, and then to provide evidence to support those findings, and provide substantial evidence if they want to have their application approved. So, transparency-wise, we're talking about the Brown Act. So, the Brown Act has a number of provisions, and this includes that all meetings of the body are open and public, everyone can participate, that we allow public comment on any item that's on an agenda. Everyone has an opportunity to participate and say something. For our regular meetings, there's also an opportunity for the public to comment about items not on the agenda. That's only for regular meetings, not for special meetings. Special meetings are about a single topic, and in that case, the public was only allowed to comment on the items on the special meeting agenda. There are different types of meetings. You guys don't have to worry a lot about that. You have your regular meetings, which is what you deal with normally. Then there are special meetings for individual topics or a couple of topics. There are different noticing requirements, but you don't have to worry about that. Our great city clerk over here will handle all the provisions about posting. There's less notice needed for a special meeting than a regular meeting, which is 72 hours notice. The big thing is that any item that's not on the agenda cannot be discussed. And for a regular meeting, that means it has to be published 72 hours beforehand. Again, talk about that. And the whole purpose here is that there's no secret meetings. And so that all deliberations and discussions need to occur in public after providing public notice of what would be discussed. So you might have something come before you, think you have great ideas, and you want to go talk to your fellow commissioners about it, or send them an email and tell them your thoughts or what you think they should be doing. Do not do that, because the whole purpose of this is that once you have 3 people or a quorum on your body, discussing it, that's deliberation that you're talking about, having a discussion, and the public's not part of that. You might not know all the facts. That's why we have it on an agenda, so the public can show up and present other evidence information that may come into play in terms of what decision you want to make. And so no decision should be made by you until after you've heard everything presented at the public meeting. So, what is a meeting? Under the Brown Act, a meeting is very broadly defined. So this is when a quorum of your body hears, discusses, deliberates, or takes action on something within the city's subject matter jurisdiction. So you should not be communicating with your other commissioners. You can have one Brown Act body, one Brown Act buddy, if you are in a body that has 5 members. So you can have one person to talk things over with or to go and meet with, but you cannot discuss with anybody else. And sometimes a commissioner will come to you and say, hey, let's talk about this item. If you already talked about it with somebody else, make sure you just say, hey, I can't talk about this one because I've already have a Brown Act buddy on this one. And I think everyone will understand. So what is permitted? So you can have individual contacts and conversations between yourself and another member of the public, not another commissioner. So you're welcome to talk to anyone else, staff, members of the public. You can have any type of contact you want. You can express, ideas that you have, especially about, legislative items. But if you have ideas about a particular project that's coming before you, you should hold off on forming your opinion until after you've heard all the evidence. We'll talk about it later, but if you do express an opinion or publish an opinion or advocate for or against a project that's coming before you, it will require your recusal because the applicant coming forward has a right to a fair hearing before an unbiased decision maker. And if you have expressed that you've already made an opinion about this and you already have made a determination, then it wouldn't be a fair hearing. One-way informational communications to members of the body, so this is people or staff sending information to all 5 commissioners or council members. That's allowed. People can submit that information coming from them to the body. The issue is you don't want to have the body communicating to each other. And there are special exceptions for when you can have a majority of your commission talking together, but they're very limited. So these are things like a social event, if you're at a Dodger game, if you're at a conference, there's certain exceptions that would apply in particular circumstances. If you think one applies, come and talk to us, myself or Kellen, and we'll go through the facts. It can be very fact specific, but in general, you don't want to be talking with each other, and especially, there's almost no exception to allow you to talk about the businesses going before your commission outside of the notice and open public meetings.
I'm so sorry. Silence.
So, that all sounds easy. Just don't, talk to 2 other, commissioners about anything, but it can get more complicated because there's more rules. So there's something called a serial meeting, and this is something you have to be very careful about. And this is basically when either directly or through intermediaries or technology, you have a discussion of commission business outside of a meeting, and it's expressly prohibited. And this can happen in a few different ways. So one example is A talks to B to talks to C. So 2 commissioners are talking about an item, and then one of the commissioners goes and talks to a 3rd commissioner. They all don't talk together in the same room, but that would be considered to be a Brown Act violation. The other situation would be you have 3 commissioners, A, B, and C, and you have X, who could be a member of the public or even a member of staff, and it's called a hub and spoke. And the issue in that one, all those communications are okay between that, but if X is telling B and C what A said, then you have a Brown Act violation. And it's for this reason you want to be very careful about when you speak with anyone, especially someone who's not staff, who's not trained about the Brown Act, because there's going to be a big temptation, especially if you're talking to maybe X is someone who's, it's their project, or they're opposed to a project, and you speak with them, and you're like, oh yeah, I really think what you're saying is important, I agree with you, I'm gonna, vote, this way, or I'm concerned about these things. Then they're gonna wanna go tell the other commissioner and say, well, A, is on my side, you should be on my side too. And then they say it to C, and then you have a problem, because now they know what the other commissioners are thinking, and other commissioners are doing. So be very careful about that. So when you're meeting with the public, especially if you're talking about an application, don't tell them, it's okay to listen, but I strongly recommend you don't tell them what your current thinking is or your analysis of a project, or especially how you plan to vote, because that could easily end up resulting in a Brown Act violation and requiring your recusal from an item that's being considered for you. Okay, there's an exclusion. If you're speaking with staff, you can speak with staff about the project. Staff just can't communicate what you are saying to another council member or another commissioner. They know not to do that. All right, now the internet. This is even more difficult to deal with. So be very careful dealing with online participation or commenting. So number one, you can, make posts on the internet. You can make, state things on Facebook or however you want to, deal with social media. But another commissioner, not even one, can comment or post off of yours. Because the thought process from the state is if there's a post and it says, Commissioner A thinks XYZ, and Commissioner B says, well, I do too, well, then you have a third commissioner looking at it, then they know how two are thinking about something, and now you have three that, know, at least one person is gonna know what a majority of quorum is thinking about a particular issue. If there's an article or something else written by someone that's not a commissioner or a council member, a single member of a commission, could comment on that, nobody else could. But in general, my recommendation is just avoid it, try not to have a problem with reading things, but don't respond to other people's posts. All right, best practices. Yes.
The assumption is that we know every commissioner in this city, and that we know when that, I'm just gonna be honest, right, like there's sometimes turnover. So I'm not sure I know 100% every commissioner that sits on every commission. So.
You don't need to know just on your commission.
So that's what I mean, so you just mean per commission itself?
Yes.
Not, okay.
If you're on the Public Works Commission, you can have thoughts about the Planning Commission. It can't be about a topic that you guys are covering in your subject matter jurisdiction. So you have to be very concerned about the other commissioners on your commission.
Okay.
Okay, so best practices, definitely don't reply all. I think staff generally tries to BCC the commission or the council when they send things out just to avoid the easy mistake. Do not send messages to the entire commission. Do not comment on online posts, especially another member of the commission already has. All right, transparency law. So in California, we have a sunshine law, the California Public Records Act, and the case law has just been expansive on this historically, and it's a huge cost and actually burden on cities. The expense of dealing with Public Record Act requests can get quite expensive. Everyone has a right to inspect the public records of any state or local agency. A public record is very broadly defined, and it's any writing containing information related to the conduct of the public's business retained by any public agency regardless of physical form or characteristics. This covers paper, emails, text, drawings, tapes, CDs, DVDs, MP3s, and basically anything could be considered to be a public record falling under this. And then under the San Jose case, records related to the public's business, regardless of their physical form or characteristics, sent or received by officials via their personal devices, are available for public inspection and copying. So you need to be very careful about how you're using your personal email accounts and your personal devices, because if you're conducting city business on those are subject to being disclosed. You'll get an email from Kelsey if we get a PRA request about communications on your commission, and you'll be in charge of searching those documents and then producing them to the city to turn over, and if you don't, you could get yourself in trouble. Yes?
I'm gonna request that I get an email from the city of Malibu for my Arts Commission, because I'm a lawyer and I have attorney-client privilege on my email. So I want a separate email box for the Arts Commission. Is that possible?
The policy decision at the city has been not to allow, to only have the city council have those email addresses and not the commissions. What you can do though is have like a Gmail address, create a new account that would just say, Pamela Arts Commissioner, Malibu Arts Commissioner @gmail.com, and that will be the address that's published by the city and put out. And I would suggest doing all your business through that separate account. I strongly, strongly recommend you do that. You don't intermix it for exactly that reason. And not just, it's not just attorneys. Other people have, private messages and things you don't want to have disclosed. And if you're intermixing them, those messages aren't public records that would have to be disclosed if you're, emailing with your family or something like that. but there's a possibility that would have to be reviewed for privilege by, our office, or potentially in a lawsuit, by a judge or by somebody else doing a forensic analysis. So separation is the key. If you keep it all consolidated, just create many places to get a free email address, use that one, and you use it only if someone emails you to your personal account. Say, please, this is my personal email. If you have any commission business, please send it to, this email address. There are protections that were put in to protect your personal email address, but if you use it to communicate for city business, then it doesn't apply. So, as we talked about, creating an unofficial city email for city business is strongly recommended. Don't use that account for personal. So if you do create a commissioner email address, don't use it for other things, so you can keep it all, tied in there. It also makes it easy to search if we do get the PRA requests. Don't have an account where it sends all your email into, consolidates all your email addresses. Keep this one separate. You want to keep it clean. And then, if you have this email address, you do need to comply with the city's document destruction policies, retention schedule. So check with the city clerk and us before deleting things in there. You don't have to keep everything forever, but we do have obligations if they are public records. And there's been an expansion in some of the trial court law dealing with Public Records Act requests. It used to be a lot more, the courts were more respectful of the transitory exception to the Public Records Act. Records under the Public Records Act that are considered transitory don't need to be retained, but there's been an expansion in a number of trial court decisions about what they consider transitory and what not. The city of LA got in some trouble for having an instant message system that would automatically delete everything every day. There's been other similar situations, so it's better safe than sorry. Same thing if you have emails on your private devices and accounts. Again, just keep everything separate. Okay, hypothetical question. All 5 members of a city commission are attending a conference. 3 of them go out to dinner. Is this a Brown Act violation?
No.
Not necessarily.
If they don't discuss
They don't
business.
discuss commission business, it's perfectly fine.
Very good, you guys have gone through this already, so we have some Brown Act experts out here, correct. So you can go out to dinner, you can talk about the Dodgers, you can talk about someone's kids, you can, talk about the weather, that's fine. Just also be aware though, and there's also an exception for a conference, if you are attending a conference, that's an exception to the Brown Act, you can have a full, council or commission, attend there. You can't go and discuss, city's business, there, but you can attend. If you go out to dinner, just be aware, especially if you're going in Malibu, they see 3 of you at there. People may be suspicious, and it may give the appearance that you're convincing. So just be clear that just be careful, when you're out there. Make sure that you do stay not on any topic that's city business. Another one. During a commission meeting, 3 of the 5 members frequently look down at their laps. A local blogger later asks if they violated the Brown Act by sending texts or emails to each other about agency business. Is this a Brown Act violation?
Yes.
Yes,
If they were,
they were discussing about the
if
voting.
they're looking at their texting emails, maybe not.
Yes. So if you're a doctor, or your kid's like in the hospital or something, you can check your email, Best practice is not to do that because it does give the appearance that you're, doing that. There's always the paranoia that, someone in the audience is texting, the city council or the commission and telling them what to say. So I suggest not doing that, especially during a public hearing. Jefferson Wagner, if you remember, was on the council. He would put his phone in a plastic bag and put it on the dais so everyone could see it, that he was not using it during the meeting. That's not required. It's a nice touch, but not required. But
code of conduct says it's not good.
there you go.
Then he could have another phone in his lap.
Now you sound like the kids trying to get out of phones at school, right? It's true. So, yes, and there's also an issue too, is if it's a public hearing and someone in the audience is telling you information or something like that, that's a problem, because all evidence needs to be disclosed in the record to the public. Whatever you're using to make your decision needs to be, done in public, not privately. That's why before the public hearing starts, we have disclosures where everyone explains any information. You can talk to someone beforehand, you got information, then you say it, I met with, John Smith, at his property, and I was looking at this, and I noticed that, the ground, that there was this, there's a protected tree on his property that would not be destroyed by this. Stated, then, the public has a chance to say something. And John can get up and say, actually, that you might think that's a protected sycamore, but actually it's, a ficus, and, it looks like this because X, Y, Z. So they have a chance to address it. So you can get information, you need to disclose it so that it's out there and the public can come and speak about it and test it. Yes?
Can the public ask for your text after the meeting?
Absolutely. That's the other danger, is even if you're not texting about something that would be, a violation of the Brown Act or about that hearing, it could be embarrassing. And there was a situation in a neighboring city where it was a staff member who was texting during the meeting and was making disparaging remarks about people that were presenting. And that ended up coming out and they lost their job. It was a really bad look. So just be aware that stuff is subject to the PRA. You are under scrutiny. And if you have to check, during the meeting, everyone, there are circumstances you need to, but try to limit it, and if you can, avoid it. Legal principles. So when we're conducting hearings, we have to, there's a number of sort of rules and principles involved. So first is equal protection. And under this, you need to treat similar people similarly. We don't play favorites. We apply the law the same. Some of our laws could be interpreted different ways. There's a gray area about some things. And in that case, we generally try to respect precedent, and it's a matter of fairness. You're not absolutely bound by how a certain section of the municipal code has been interpreted before. Sometimes it could be subject to other interpretations, but we do want to treat similar people fairly. It also lets people predict and be able to understand when they're proposing a project or put something forward and what they can expect. So if that changes, that makes it difficult. And it also can impact the city's ability to defend its decision. So there's a body of case law, if someone challenges a decision, that gives deference to the decision of a council or a commission, because they seem to be the experts, because you're dealing with this law and our city's laws and regulations on a regular basis. And because of that, there's deference given to it, and it's difficult for someone else to say it should have been interpreted a different way. If you're not following a consistent interpretation, then that goes out the window, and that'll make this decision more subject to being overturned. Yes?
When we have written interpretations of the LIP and the codes and everything, are we supposed to follow those?
Yes. So everyone on the Planning Commission and everyone in general should know there are a number of policies that have been adopted. There's two different types. One is council policies that apply to a wide range of items, and then there's also planning policies, and these have been adopted, by the planning director. Will now be the community development director, and what these are they're adopted at a staff level after a lot of consideration to deal with complicated issues in our codes and trying to have a consistent interpretation of them. So those policies are available. If you don't have a copy, staff can get those to you easily, but you should be familiar with them, and staff should be applying them and putting them forward in the staff report so that you're aware of them. We want to follow. That's the whole purpose of the policies, is to encourage and be consistency in how we interpret our code. Yes?
Let's say staff is no longer really giving suggestions to approve a project or deny a project. Is that part of the interpretation, or?
That's not a policy. I mean, that's not a planning policy. So what you're talking about is a staff level determination of the city manager and the community development director about which projects. I think it's generally only dealing with variances where they will present the evidence, but haven't been including a staff recommendation on variances, usually, I think.
That's correct. And we do provide a resolution that can be considered for adoption or amendment at the meeting, just to provide some basis.
So that's a policy decision, you know, some cities provide no recommendations, some provide recommendations in every item. It runs the gamut, yeah.
So, and I think this is specific to quasi-judicial commissions, which I think the planning commission, as you mentioned, and also the mobile home.
It's gonna be yours.
Right?
Yep.
Are you suggesting that the commissioners are bound by a policy determination made by staff rather than the council?
They're not bound, so your job as a commissioner is to apply the law to the facts. And, you know, there are areas of the law that are open to interpretation in different ways. But what I'm saying is that policies here are meant to ensure consistency. So if you disagree with it, you can. But if you do, then you can run into issues. We will get less deference towards that if it departs from how we've been treating other people. And it also can open up to questions, especially if, you know, there's some other reason. If you know, we're approving projects with one interpretation for maybe someone of a particular race and someone of a different race gets a different interpretation or different issues, it can create problems. So we just try to be consistent in how we do it, but it comes down to the commissioners to, you look at the law and you say, staff has this wrong, you know, you have the ability to do that. You are not bound by that. They can bring it up, if, you know, if they go and challenge it in court, but the deference is given is going to be based on, you know, the plain language of what you have there, the reasonableness of the interpretation, and then the longevity of how long that's been applied and how consistently it's been applied. Due process, so this is, everyone needs notice and opportunity to be heard before unbiased decision maker. So we need to give everyone a fair hearing. That's very important, that everyone comes up there, even if they disagree with the decision, they feel that it was fair, and that it wasn't someone that already made a decision up before that they showed up, that they were heard, they got to say, you know, their piece, and, you know, sometimes the chips don't fall, you know, the way you want it to, but you want everyone to respect the process, because when people don't respect the process and don't think it's fair, then you lose trust in the system, and you know, people get, you know, very upset. And, you know, people will always be disappointed, but if you give a fair process, it takes the sting out of that a lot. Regulatory takings. So this is an issue mostly dealing with the Planning Commission, and we'll talk, more slides come back about this, in terms of the conditions that you apply, or in terms of the legislation that's put through. You could run into issues where you're considered to take someone's property and have to pay compensation for it. And there's also preemption in state mandates. State law, you know, will preempt us. An example here is in our city, the Coastal Act generally will supersede anything in our municipal code if there's a direct conflict between it, because that's a state law that's being applied in the city. So we can, in areas that you know, not covered by the Coastal Act, you know, we have full discretion. We can also put in things that are more protected in the environment in our municipal code, and those will be applied in addition to the Coastal Act, but we can't put things in to undermine what's in our local coastal program. So, regulatory taking, this is a very high level sort of look at this. So, the big test is sort of the Nolan-Dolan body of law, and under this, a regulation or taking or condition, if the government demands an exaction that lacks a nexus with a legitimate state interest or lacks proportionality to the project's impacts. So that basically means if you are putting a condition on the project, it has to have some kind of nexus, some kind of reason. You can't just be like, all right, your business needs to close at 3 o'clock. You know, you need to have a reason. So this is, you know, for traffic impacts or you know, for other kind of, you know, how it's gonna, you know, interact with the neighborhood. You have to have a reason for why you're doing it, or why you're gonna make somebody, okay, you need to go, you know, add an extra balcony in here, or you need to move your house backward to this side. You need to have a reason to be able to do that. You need to have a nexus to the project and to the impacts from it. It has to be proportional. So, you know, the Nolan-Dolan cases, you know, dealt with a situation where it was famously that, you know, there was a project coming through and it required a public easement to be put across the property. And there was no nexus to why building a house would require you to go and put through a public access in that area, and it wasn't proportional to the impacts. They weren't blocking a public access from somebody else, or, you know, negatively impacting that. And so, something you need to consider, it's not just carte blanche to put conditions in, you need to be thinking intelligently about how it applies to the project, why you would need to do it and to what degree. And it ties into the evidence presented and the findings you need to make. Yes?
In the Nolan Dolan case, because the state was completely wrong, did the state have to pay all the legal fees of the person that brought the case?
I couldn't tell you, but I would imagine they would. You have, the public attorney general statute. If you put something forward that has broad impact, you do. But there's also a body of law that if you have your own selfish interest in your own property, you're not subject to it. So I don't know the answer on whether they got the attorney's fees in that case.
Is that for variances?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. For anything, any condition you want to put on the project. You want to be able to tie it to a reason that you need to have it, and then make sure it's proportional to the impact that it's having. Yes?
So just to follow up, just for a variance, so is it only projects that include a variance,
No,
or
for
any project regardless?
Any condition, you have a conditional
if it's
use
compliant?
permit.
Well, if you're gonna not grant a variance or say no, do you have to have a nexus?
So, this,
Or is it the fact that it's a variance enough?
so the fact that it's a variance is not enough to deny a project. You need, when it comes down to the project, you're looking at whether to grant or not. You look at the evidence and whether, they presented substantial evidence that demonstrates you can make the findings. And there's like 7, findings that need to generally be made for a variance in the city, including, impacts on public safety, neighbor compatibility, and a whole number of different reasons. So you have to identify that reason, and if you have evidence showing that it's going to have a negative impact for these, you couldn't deny the project. This proportionality more comes into play if you're going to approve a project, maybe at a variance or some other request, and you're like, well, I can approve it, so long as it's conditioned that it's moving out of farther from the ESHA or from a pathway or for some reason that you would need it. There has to be some kind of reason, justifiable reason that's proportionate for what conditions you put in. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do these nexuses need to be stated during the open meeting at that time?
Yes. So when you're making your decision, you're explaining what you do. You want to be able to point to the evidence for why you're making that decision. Generally, staff will help with this. And it'll, when you have a resolution put forward, staff will be putting forward evidence about why the findings can be made or why they can't be made, and that'll be put into that. If it's brought back because you make different changes to it, then it will help that. If you identify it, staff will help you with that process. But you need to identify. You say this is a problem because I'm seeing this as a coastal bluff and it needs to be farther set back. You need to lay the basis out there. Otherwise, it's just arbitrary. You can't. We don't make decisions by, okay, let's take a vote in the audience. Who likes the project? Who doesn't? We don't just put a finger in the air and sort of, sometimes you have to make decisions that are very unpopular, and it's, if you can't make a finding or you see a project that does comply even though people don't like it, the codes are put in place so that there's rules and expectations, and these rules govern the ability to develop your property in the city. And even if the neighbor hates it and it's really ugly and it's gonna be not great, the problem lies with our city council and whoever put through those rules. And we can change those rules, but once those rules are in place, that's what you're entitled to do. And if we're not letting someone do it, we can't do it because people don't like it, because it's a bad project. It has to be because there's evidence that they have not proven that they're entitled to do it under the codes in the city. The Penn Central balancing test, gives a more complicated analysis that deals more with legislation. This is a situation where if you're trying to change the rules of development in the city or what's allowed, if someone has invested a lot of money, for a long period of time under the old rules, you can come into an issue with those expectations, especially if you have a retroactive ordinance that would, prevent someone remove something that they have. There are ways around it, having an amortization period. We want to say we can no longer have, restaurants in the city. And we'd have a problem, everyone invested in making all these restaurants, they have these entitlements. But you could do it over a long period of time if you wanted to do something along those lines. That's something that will help with if there's legislation that comes through, is just to be aware of it.
Sure, I have a question.
Yes.
Measure R, when the voters passed it, and then it was denied on appeal, right? So did the city ever appeal that, Measure R?
Measure R was the.
Formula retail.
Yeah, with the formula retail, yeah, that was.
Overturned.
It was passed by the people, and then Judge Chalfant invalidated it. It was challenged in court.
So it never went beyond the second appeal?
I don't remember how far it went up, I'm sure, but it was invalidated by the courts.
So that's an example of.
Exactly, so they found that to be overreach in the city, and they invalidated it, and then came back with, and put through the formula retail ordinance that you guys are familiar with today. Other land use regulations, state planning law, it lays out, everyone has a general plan and a zoning ordinance, we talked about in the city, the coastal act applies throughout, and then permits that you're gonna see are, coastal development permits, conditional use permits, other types of, approvals in the municipal code or the local coastal program, and these approvals all run with the land. We don't have approvals that are, these types of permits don't attach to an individual. That would be prohibited for a number of reasons, a lot dealing with potential discrimination issues. If you're going to issue it to one person, you can just imagine the problems with how you're picking that. So it matters is the use and what you're being proposed for, and then that attaches to the land afterwards.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When there is a permit that runs with the land, can you get, like, in an emergency situation like what's going on now, can you do a sunset clause on those, like say it ends at this time?
It's very difficult to have the sunset clause in terms of a time limitation. If you're talking about like a conditional use permit, you need to have a real strong reason about why it would need to expire. So it is potentially allowed in some circumstances. There would be really sort of project specific, that we would have to sort of, talk through. The one you guys dealt with Rafi's Lounge. So, in that case, it was very an odd sort of application because you had an approved conditional use permit and, CDP to change and put a hotel in place. And then you had, before that's built, you had to come in and make a separate application for this conditional use permit. And the conditions and the projects conflict, so they could not ever exist at the same time. So it naturally, will terminate when that happens. You probably could put, a limitation in that case, but it'd be tied not to a moment in time, but to if we built the other project. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Fair hearings. So I want everyone to, as we said earlier, I want everyone to feel that they had a fair shot at everything and that they had an unbiased decision maker. So we want to announce the procedures up front. This is the big thing. So whatever rules that we have, we want to let everyone know before it starts. We don't want to start saying everyone gets 3 minutes and then we're like, man, there's a lot of people, we want to just wrap this up, everyone gets 30 seconds now. That is not fair. Once we make that, unless there's a fire outside and we need to wrap up or something, we need to go adhere to whatever we put in. Now you can reduce that, the commission or the chair can go and say, okay, we have 150 speakers here tonight, if we let them all speak, we'll be here until, tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So because of that, I'm giving everyone, 2 minutes or 1 minute. And, we can go and do that, you just need to announce it before you start. Going on main and, yes?
So what about follow-up questions to applicants after the hearings, public comments closed?
I generally don't recommend that you speak to anyone once the public hearing is closed, because that's when you want all the evidence, because once you do that, there's no chance for anybody to respond. Now, if you have a question after the public hearing is closed, you should direct it to staff. Staff should have any information that you need. If there is something that's specific to an applicant that you can't get from anywhere else, there are some circumstances where it's okay to go and do that. An example is if you're looking at potentially denying a project and you want to, ask them, do you want to continue this so that we can go and, rather than getting a denial, or do you want to do that? You can go bring them up to ask them that. If there's a factual issue, you bring them up. You can do it if you really need to, but then you need to give the other side the chance to sort of comment on it. But generally, you want to close that and be done with the record. Everyone should say their piece, up front. And if you have questions about the facts of it, you should be saying those. That's why before the public hearing starts, any commissioner questions or comments, you know, that's when you should go raise it. So you're like, well, you know, what kind of tree is that? You know, where's the bluff edge? You know, what's this? You don't want to have an opinion because you don't want to go, if you go on and say, you know, well, this project's terrible and, you know, we're going to have to thumbs down it. If you say that before the public hearing, well, then you're showing bias and people don't think they have a fair hearing. But if you have legitimate questions, that's the time to do it, is to ask those questions before we do the public hearing. Then not only the applicant and the opposition and the public all get a chance to go comment about it.
Yeah, so, but if the meeting is starting to go sideways because of no questions coming in ahead of time or concerns coming in ahead of time, it is okay to bring the applicant back up to dispute.
Like I said, I discourage it, but it, you know, you want to get the information out there, especially at the planning commission. You know, what do you want to vet information, so there's more, maybe a little more flexibility at the planning commission to doing it, because any problems can be cured if there's an appeal to the city council. But really, you should try to get your questions out before anyone gets a chance to talk, and you should, because it's unfair, right? I mean, that's the problem is, if you close the public hearing, and now you're like, well, you know, I want the applicant to come up, you know, and they might think, well, that's just because the applicant's his like buddy, you know, and like they're giving him more time to speak, or they're like, I want, you know, this neighbor to come up and speak more, and we don't ever just let someone come up and speak. If you have a specific factual question, you should go first to staff. If staff can't answer, they need the help, then you really need to get that answered. You could go do that, you reopen the public hearing, then you got it, but we do our best to make it fair if we have to do that.
It's not okay to ask the applicant, is that okay with you if we do it this way? That's an opinion, right, instead of a fact?
Well, here's what I would say, is if, you know, the applicants come through with a proposed project, and, you know, they have a right to a thumbs up or thumbs down, you know, right on it. So if you're in a situation where, you know, would you rather have a denial, you know, we're gonna condition it like this?
No, I mean an actual condition. In other words, do you want to stay open until 12 instead of 11, after the hearing's closed?
I wouldn't recommend, you know, doing that, especially to expand, you know, the amount of time. It's really for you guys to evaluate the evidence that was presented of, you know, what the impacts are from a project. And if you think that generally, you know, whatever they propose is what they're asking for, if you want to call it back, you know, then, you know, that's okay. You shouldn't be bringing the applicant up generally to sort of to do that. Also, if you're expanding the hours of operation, it's a problem, because there might be someone out there who's like, oh, I didn't care if this closed at 10 o'clock, but if you're letting it open until 3 in the morning, well, then I had stuff I wanted to say, you know, about it.
Well, yeah, I'm just gonna chime in.
Okay.
So, I know what John and Drew are talking about, but you have your facts, okay? And you understand that, you've gone to see the project, and then we're sitting up there and a lot of different things come up during the course of the meeting. Sometimes it's a safety factor, sometimes, you know, somebody lets, you know, and we do need to address the applicant again and to not give them the opportunity to respond. We think we are gonna let this pass as long as you build a 50-foot wall right in front of your front door. Are you know, I mean, I'm exaggerating. But in that case, I mean, maybe that would be totally prohibitive for that applicant, or maybe it wouldn't, and I think we wanna know if we're gonna, you know, if we're gonna push it forward, or if we're gonna add that condition, we wanna understand it from the builder side of things. So we bring the applicant up and we ask, and usually that helps us get to a resolution.
Okay. So in those circumstances, first, I mean, the applicant does have an ability to go respond, you know, they get a rebut, so they do have a chance to go address these things. If something comes up, especially if you're considering a condition, you know, that'd be a situation, I would phrase it differently. I would say, you know, we can make the findings, you know, if we're gonna put this condition in here, you know, and you can ask them, you know, if you want to accept that, or if you want to have a denial, you know, so they have a right to an up or down vote on it. So if you bring it up to ask them that question, I think that's okay. Okay?
Okay.
But do you have to open the hearing for everybody else to comment back there?
Generally not, if you're just asking if, you know, if you want a denial or if you want the condition. If, you know, if you're getting this kind of factual issue, I mean, it's sort of, it's an art, not a science, you know, you're trying to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity. So if something's coming up and you're letting one side address it, because, you know, if they just say one sentence word, yes, we'll take it, but if they start saying, yeah, and and blah, 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 and I think, start making other arguments, about things, and you wanna have the other side to be able to have a chance.
But it's in a denial or accept decision, it's not, what do you want?
Well, right, but generally, it's just us and the applicant. Most of the time, there isn't anybody. It's us just trying to make the right decision
Yep.
for the project. There's usually nobody else there except for Lauren.
If there's nobody speaking and there's only one person, then you're, reopening the public hearing is not a big deal because you're gonna speak. Anyone else who wants to speak can go and speak and you can reclose it. So if you're in that situation, wouldn't be, yes.
I feel a lot of the times the questions that are being referenced right now are kind of more for clarification on things. And I think what I'm hearing from you is it would be smarter for us to better be directing those at staff, which a lot of them are.
Yep.
And then let the staff, if they feel, hey, I can't really answer this properly, let them bring the applicant back up.
Yes.
To have that.
That's what I would recommend. Start with staff. Okay. Yes.
What are the parameters for conducting research for making an informed decision?
So here's what I would say is you are not an advocate. Oops. You're not, I think I'm survived. You're not an advocate, and that's the problem, is that if you're advocating for a position, you're out there, researching and trying to, kill a project or support a project, that's gonna evidence bias, and you're gonna have a problem, and you need to recuse yourself, and if you don't, then you'd be subject to a problem, and, due process fair hearing argument when it goes up. You should be reading your staff report. You should be, researching, the code and the law, as that's, put into there. You're welcome to go visit the site. If you do, visit the site, because, seeing that can make a difference. Some people are visual, or tactile learners and they want to be able to see something. But you need to disclose that before the hearing so everyone can talk about it, because you might misperceive something. And so you need to put that out there so everyone has a chance to address the evidence, in advance. But you should not be out there putting together a brief, and if you're showing up with a brief about that, I mean, how does everyone feel? Like if you show up and someone has a treatise and they're out there with your project, you don't feel that it was an unbiased situation. It's okay to do research, okay to ask notes, but you want to avoid advocating. Yes.
And and then for quality control. Let's say somebody's contracted by city and they say we provide this service. And is it allowed for me to drive around and make sure that service is provided?
Yeah, you can give me you want to give me a more specific example?
Let's say somebody's, I don't want to disclose it, but maybe I should talk to
There,
you.
how about I disclose something in there? So say there's a bus line that wants to come into the city. So they contact an individual and say, we provide this service, we'd love for you to learn more. Is that okay for a commissioner to actually do that research on that particular one? Or should it be something that is hands off and something else is supposed to do?
It depends also on the topic. So we've been talking a lot about public hearings, and that is a lot more constrained because you're quasi judicial, you're a judge. I mean, it's supposed to be everyone presents the sides and you decide on the evidence. You're not out there gathering the evidence yourself. If you have a question about the evidence, you should tell staff beforehand. So if you think there's something wrong or you need more information about where things are situated, tell staff, they'll take a picture. It also saves you a huge headache in the future if there's a challenge in court where if you took a picture and you did the research, you're going to be on the stand, they're going to depose you, and they're going to be asking you all these questions about how did you take that picture, why did you take it, was it fair, all these things. Otherwise you have staff unbiased, doing it. And so if what information is asked for it, but generally have staff, do it. And if you're in a situation where a lot of our commissions are, out there to, gather information. So if you're coming with a policy, choice, and you're making a recommendation to the council on that, you have a lot more discretion to go out there and, do research and bring information, to it. You're not in a quasi-judicial situation, you're in a legislative, you're trying to think what's best for the city. So you want to do that kind of research and that's what you're working on.
So for example, a security company claims that they provide 6 cars every day to the burn areas, right?
Okay.
We want to make sure there are 6 cars in, let's say, Big Rock, West Forest, everything. Would I be allowed to drive up and down and just see for myself?
I wouldn't, you can go and do that. I mean, you probably have staff do research for you if you want, but you're welcome to go and, you know, do that. You need to disclose it and say that I, you know, drove on these days and this is what I saw, you know, but yes.
And then so it's, maybe I should just also like give my car dash cam to provide that or something.
If you're taking, be careful, because if you're taking video and pictures, then you're creating public records that could be disposable and things like that. If you wanna take video, it's like evidence or pictures, things like that, it's better to have staff do it. We can talk more maybe about a particular situation, cause, you know, we need to know more about, you know, these are areas where it can be very problematic if it's an entitlement application, different if you're looking at making a policy recommendation legislative.
And then one last thing, and I promise I'm done. But are we allowed to ask a journalist to do it, you know? Just that?
Very good.
It would be investigative reporting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, is it,
Sorry, just want to be safe. Just want to follow.
There's no prohibition against it.
yeah.
There's no prohibition against it.
It's a little odd to, you know, recruit, you know, press to go and do things. If it was an application, I would say you shouldn't do that because it might be showing you're trying to, you know, advocate or, you know, get press to go for or against something. If it's, like I said, a legislative item or some kind of other policy choice, there's a lot more reach for who you can talk to. There's not, you're allowed to talk to the media, that's not.
I'll check with you like nonetheless, thanks.
Okay.
So hypothetical question.
Okay.
Planning commission. The commissioner comes in with a phone book of concerns, doesn't share it with the other commissioners prior to the hearing, and tries to sell the commission on those concerns during the commissioner comments of the hearing. Is there?
You mean deliberation?
Yeah, during deliberation.
No, you're saying before. You're saying during deliberation, or you're saying they're asking the questions of staff before the.
No, they're not asking the questions of staff, it's during the conversations between the commissioners.
So you're allowed to, you know, do preparation, you know, and to make, you know, transitory notes.
But they should be sharing it with the rest of the commissioners prior to.
No, if you're taking your own personal notes, so that, you know, if you're highlighting or circling, and so you have, you know, there's topics that you wanna bring up, you know, you're welcome to, and you actually shouldn't be sharing that in advance because you have a Brown Act issue, because you're sharing your opinion with the rest of the commission. So, it's okay to have some notes, but like I said, you know, be judicious in it, you know, if you're making a big tome of, you know, arguments, you know, and reading off of that, you know, people will notice that and, you know, they'll have an opinion, but you can do preparation, it is okay to have notes.
Well, in that case, when you ask staff for questions, and they give you answers, I've always been told you're not allowed to tell anybody what answers you got. And staff does not send those questions as correspondence to the commission. So how does that square with?
So you're gonna find a couple things here. So first, if there's a informational question about an item that you raise, you know, is the bluff edge here, is, you know, this the boundary, is this whatever, you raise it to staff. Staff generally will wanna, you know, get that information and then we'll just not reveal that you're asking a question, not revealing your thought process, we'll say, hey, here's some more information, I'll distribute it to the commission there, or if they need more time, do it, you know, during the presentation. So they should bring information, you know, to the rest of the commission. If you're speaking with a staff member and discussing an item, you know, you're welcome to, you know, say, you know, what it is, unless it's speaking with me or Kellen and you have an attorney-client privilege, if it's something about liability or something like that. But you're talking about planning issues, you're welcome to say, I spoke with Tyler and he said that, you know, we need to consider this, or this is how this policy applies. That's okay to say.
I've only done that on disclosure, but I've never once had staff send my questions to the commissioners, or the answers. Prior to the meeting.
I don't recommend they send out your question or forward them. But if there's new information, then we want all the commissioners to have the same amount of information.
Okay, and then another thing is, on this, you're talking about doing your own research. For example, one of the lines, 2 lines we got on every single house is neighborhood character, is there are 1- and 2-story houses in the neighborhood. Well, that isn't a whole lot of information. So you can go out and actually find out what the neighborhood looks like.
you're welcome to drive through the neighborhood. I would recommend though, if you're not getting enough information to evaluate neighborhood character, you tell staff, I need more information about, this envelope of what this is. And if you go and do your own research, then it starts looking like you may be advocating, but you need to disclose it. So if you go through, like I drove down the street and I saw there's a lot of, 2-story houses, state it out there, and then the applicant and the public and everyone can comment and say, well, actually, that street is, an anomaly, or actually, that looks like a 2-story, but it's not. They can address it. They say, actually, there's a whole bunch more of those on, this street, So if you disclose it, up front, then everyone gets a chance to test it. But in general, the recommendation is to have staff do the research, so it.
But if they always say the same thing, that's not with the research.
Well, I'm just gonna say, we had this issue come up, and when we discussed neighborhood character, staff did present a map. They did present a ratio of sizes of homes. They did present, percentages to make a determination of general neighborhood character.
Which was presented by the applicant, not the staff.
Well, neighborhood character is something that people have different opinions about. It wasn't until, I don't remember how many years ago, there used to not be any analysis of, square footage or different things. It is an evolving, determination, and it may not be enough information for you to make a determination, but it may be a determination that others can make. And that when you go off what the information is that's presented, you need to be able to have substantial evidence to support your decision, whichever way you go.
So I hear that we should be asking staff for some opinions and research, but I also understand that staff is overworked and, I think that it would be good for us to know the rules on how much commissioners could be interacting with staff or what the guardrails are, so there's a balance for me to know.
Thank you for raising that. That was a topic of discussion this very morning. So the trick to it is that as a commissioner or a council member, you need the information to be able to make your decision. If you don't have that, you need it, and that you need to make that request to staff. The trick is that you need to do it through, for the commissioners, your liaison, or for the council members through the city manager, and then you say, I need this information, or if our city manager tells you to work directly with the community development director or planner, then you work directly, with them. So you want that information, those are fair requests, and you should be getting that. The farther you can make that request, the better, so staff can coordinate it. But if you don't have the information you need, how are you gonna make a decision?
That was my.
And it's much better to make the request in advance than to come to the council meeting and say, I need this information, let's continue the item.
Right.
And then everyone wastes their time, right?
I was just going to mention that for at least 3 of our commissioners on a fairly regular basis, if the questions that they pose to a case planner lead the case planner to do additional analysis that was not already in the report, our practice is to anonymize the questions and provide the responses. So it might not look like the question that you submitted, John, but your questions have been distributed to everybody with responses, but rewritten in a way to not disclose that they came from you specifically.
And really when we're doing that.
And it's only if it's adding new information.
Yeah. And if we're doing that, we want to make sure that how it's phrased is just informational and it doesn't reflect an opinion or anything. Yes.
Okay, so I have a question totally different than your planning commission. I'm having an issue with people during their public comments speaking about other people's children. So I don't know, like in your 3 minutes, like they can just say whatever they want. I don't, like, do we have the ability to stop? I know only the chair technically can do that. But do we have some guardrails onto what we can allow? Just with kids is my issue.
What are people saying about people's kids?
Well, just the
That's
swim
insane.
club drama. Just the swim club drama has ignited some stuff. So anyway,
Okay.
I kind of went out and I said, can you guys please not speak about other people's kids, right? And now they're attacking me and they're doing a whole public records thing on me, which they get to do. But I'm just curious as like, do you have any?
How far does the First Amendment go?
Yeah.
So-
Very far.
What you're doing is exactly the right thing, is it's starting to be a problem, is for the chair to, stay up front. Hey, we need to have decorum, here, let's not make personal attacks, let's keep focused on the business, that's what matters here. And, it's really inappropriate to be, attacking someone else's especially sometimes children, my God. And that's what you can do, is try to do your best to sort of, we can help, give you some language to do that. Sounds like you've done a good job.
But I mean, I'm not the chair, so that's my main question.
Then
It's like, if you are not the chair, but you're still on this commission, are you allowed to say something, or?
So, generally the chair controls, but, I think it's okay to, permission from the chair, I just wanna say, we should, let's keep this, above board, let's, have decorum and, respect for each other. In terms of shutting people down, it is difficult, in order to do that. If somebody is not talking about a topic, if this is, we have an item, we're discussing, the plans for, the hours of operation of, the pool or whatever, and someone's talking about, Little League or something else, not a topic, you give them a warning, hey, we're talking about this, if you wanna talk about that, you have to do it either at the general items not on the agenda portion or on an agenda item for this. If they don't respect that, you can cut them off because, it's not on the agenda. They don't have a right to go speak about random things about a particular topic. If they are creating a disruption, that's the other time that you can, shut them down. If somebody is, out of control, attacking someone, creating an environment where you can't conduct the meeting, you can shut them out, but they must be warned first. There's specific rules about this that you must, in the morning, say, excuse me, Mr. Jones, you are creating a disruption, we need to be able to conduct this meeting. The way that you are, behaving yourself is creating this, we can't operate. Give them a warning and then say, if you continue doing it, we'll have to cut you off and we'll have to remove you from the room. You can do that, but it's definitely don't recommend if that happens. Call or text us, or the staff should, because you wanna make sure
But
that.
technically, their time would stop, and then they'd get that additional time after. Usually, these speakers are people that want their whole 3 minutes, right? So, if you're gonna pause them, the timer has to stop, and then it would resume once they start again.
If you're briefly admonishing them, I don't think you need to stop the
Okay.
timer, I mean, they've sort of, been, creating a disruption or speaking off, so I don't think you need to go and, be super strict. If you go and spend 2 minutes, admonishing them, well, you can't, you erase someone's time by us sort of taking it, so, that's what I would say about that.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm still trying to figure out, so about the quality control research, right? So I'm gonna ask the chair for permission, for example, and then I can, for example, email, Noah, and ask him to actually drive around, that, just to make sure the parameters are respected, if I don't have knowledge of how to do it. So is that okay, is that selfish on my part to just say, spend like 4 hours driving, or?
Well, I would say probably be, moderate your requests, it'll be up to staff about whether they're gonna allocate the resource to go into it. So I would start, if you have a request with, staff, they may not have the resources to do it. And then if they don't, then, especially if it's not a public hearing, you can go and do some. If there's particular issues, I think we should talk about it, I wanna make sure I give you good advice specific to what you're looking at.
And Trevor, if I could tack on, just when you have requests for use of the staff time, it should go to the director liaison, so that would be Susan for you, not just your recording secretary.
Oh, cool, thank you.
Also, I would think that the cars have some kind of tracking for their phones do, and you could just ask for a record.
Trevor, I'm gonna.
Where the cars drive
Folks,
around.
you're gonna get a copy of this after the meeting, we'll send it to everyone, so questions, please send them to Trevor and myself. I know some people do have schedules, so, yeah, we're overtime, so,
Can you tell us who our liaison is, because last time we had Brown Act training, I was told only the city manager or the city treasurer or the city attorney got to talk.
what we'll do when we send this out is every commission will send a liaison list to you, so you know who your liaison person is.
It should have been Maureen, I don't know if it's gonna be Melinda or Tyler or.
We'll send that out with him.
So, okay. All right, we'll try to move this a little faster. I'm in a welcoming environment, even for unpopular views, that's part of why we don't encourage or allow applause, so you don't intimidate people from, having an opinion that's different from the crowd. Because even if you have a majority in a room, that might not reflect even the majority in the city, just because someone's loud doesn't mean they should dominate, how we conduct our meetings. Listen to opinions, people come and say, I like it, I don't like it, but you need to rely on facts. And so you should focus on relevant issues, make sure you have evidence to support the decision that you're gonna make, state your reasons, so that everyone understands why you're making a decision. It's not just because you like it, you don't like it. And make sure you make your ex parte disclosures of people you meet with and evidence that you have received that is not in the public record before the public hearing, so it can be addressed by everyone. Findings. So substantial evidence is what you need. So it's relevant information that a reasonable mind might accept to support a conclusion. Evidence is facts, reasonable assumptions predicated on facts, expert opinions supported by facts. Not evidence, argument, speculation, unsubstantiated opinion, clearly inaccurate or not credible statements. So when you're listening about evidence coming in, you need to hear some things a non-expert could go opine on. There's a tree in this location, there's this or that. If you're going to have someone come and say, oh, it looks really unstable, well, are you a geotechnical expert? Did you get a study done? Have you done the research? You can't just go on just because someone says something. Doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean that it's evidence that you can rely on. The role of findings, very important. Findings provide a written explanation of why, legally and factually, a public agency is making a particular decision. They also provide a framework for you to make your decisions, and they enhance the integrity of the process. They help guide your analysis. This is what you should be looking at, is what findings need to be made. And also, by focusing on those findings, it reduces the likelihood that you'll randomly leap to conclusions or make a decision that's not supported by the evidence. It also enables applicants and other parties to determine whether and what basis they should seek judicial review and understand, especially if it's an appealable decision, where the weaknesses are, or what the issues are that have been concerning. It also helps dissuade parties from challenging well-reasoned decisions. If you have a decision that's based on strong evidence, it very likely will not be challenged in court. It also informs the court that you are making a fair process and explains the decision. You will get deference, but if you're not basing your decision on evidence, you won't get that deference. And then finally, it also provides guidance to future applicants. It shows what the commission and where it's looking at and what kind of evidence is needed to demonstrate the findings that are needed. We talked about conditions, excess and proportionality are needed. Also, when you're doing condition, make sure it's enforceable. Having a condition out there that is not going to be enforceable is not worth putting in. It's just a waste of everyone's time, and it generates complaints. So think about that. Some conditions are, in an area where you can't see. If you're requiring someone to, put their patio furniture away or do something that would never be enforceable, be able to see it. Don't create the problem for code enforcement. You want to be able to prove it. Political Reform Act. Let's talk a little bit. We talk about economic interest, conflicts of interest.
Are you going to answer more questions?
Yeah, after. Let's get through this, and then anyone else stay. We'll stay as long as you want.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kellen Martz. I'm the Assistant City Attorney if I haven't met you. I was going to do a 3 lawyers walking to a bar joke, but we don't have time, so we are going to move through this. Okay, the Political Reform Act, it's a state law. It was passed, California was the first state to pass an ethics and governance reform after Watergate, so this is where this came from. It's about disclosures, ethics. We fill out our Form 700s with the city that gets sent to the state. You have to disclose your economic interest. So we don't have a Watergate and people are funneling things through the back door. We have to disclose business investments, sources of income, employment, real property, your home property, gifts, and personal finances. If you are involved in a decision and you have property and it is within 500 feet of the subject property, there is presumed to be a financial effect where you have to recuse. There are a few exceptions, but they have to be discussed with either the city attorney's office or the FPPC. The middle category, 500 and 999 feet away, there is a financial effect if it's material for the decision could change the development potential. So if there's a subject property 550 feet away from you and you're saying, oh, you could build 1 house, now you can build 2, it might make your property more valuable. Same with income producing potential. If there's a zoning change and before short-term rentals were banned and now they're allowed, that might affect the value of your property. And so highest and best use, character, or the market value. If you make a vote that changes the value, doubles the value of your home, that would qualify. If you're 1,000 feet or more away, The financial effect on your decisions is presumed not to be material unless there's clear and convincing evidence. So those are type of things you really don't need to disclose unless maybe you know the person or there's some other thing that would really stick out in your mind or stick out in the mind of someone from the public about why, even though you're far away, your vote would change the value of your property. If in these categories, the answer is yes, 1, almost always, 2, most likely, 3, probably not, but they all have exceptions. If that's the case, you have to recuse. And in a financial recusal, you need to say why. You need to leave the room, wait, the chair needs to wait before proceeding until you're out of the room, and then they can proceed with that item. The consent agenda exception is those rules still apply if there's something on the consent agenda. However, you don't have to leave the room because you're not having a hearing on it, you're not discussing it. The way it works in a consent agenda is if there's 10 items on there, you say, I am recusing myself from 2B, and that's it. So you will vote on everything but 2B, and then they would record it differently in the minutes. But because there's no discussion, you don't need to leave the room and go through that process. All right. Other types of recusal issues, due process. So the Political Reform Act is kind of bright line rules that are put in place. The law is the law. Due process is that fun, squishy-feely type of law where lawyers get involved. So it's common law, it's built out of case law, it's not 500 feet, here's the rule, you've got to recuse. So what does due process mean for people appearing before the city? They have to be given notice. Clerk sends out notices all the time, right? We can't have a fair system if people don't know that we're making votes and decisions here. So they need to have a notice, they need to have an opportunity to be heard. We give that through a public comment, we give that through the time that applicants are given to present their projects, and then they have to have fair and impartial decision makers. That's part of why we're all here, to make sure that we're doing the best we can to be fair and impartial in all the decisions we make. That's why it's required that if you have ex-parte contacts, that means contacts outside of the hearings, that you disclose those. That's why we do disclosures before we hear our planning commission items and that type of thing. So if you talk to people outside of the process that may impact the decision you make, either for or against, you need to disclose, hey, I had a conversation with the applicant or the applicant's attorney or the neighbors, and put that onto the record so everyone is clear of the conversations that went on that impact our decisions. Another of our squishy-feely common law. So a lot of, back in the day, the laws were just common law. They were out of case law, they weren't written in stone, and so the common law bias doctrine is based on the idea that you have to be disinterested, diligent, and you have to be working primarily for the benefit of the public. Most of you here, we don't get paid, for being on commissions. You get your free sandwiches and stuff, but your primary benefit is for the benefit of the public. I used to be a commissioner in West Hollywood on a rent control board. I did it because I loved helping the city, and that's why I think the majority of you are here is, the benefit of the public. So that is a requirement under the common law bias doctrine, is your votes and your work has to be primarily for the benefit of the public. And then you also can't place yourself in a position where your private personal interest may conflict with your duties. So if you do have private personal interests, you need to recuse yourself. And that's okay. If there's a project that comes before you and you're like, I hate the person, I hate the project, you could hate it for any reason or dislike it, the color of the paint or whatever. It is completely okay to just say, I'm recusing on this item. And unlike in the financial disclosures, you don't have to put on the record the reason why.
You can just say you hate them.
Yes, you could say, I don't advise saying I hate the person, but you sure could if you wanted to. Best practices. These are, kind of life things, but if you can't be fair, don't participate. Avoid statements before the close of the hearing. You need to let everyone present, and then you can state your thinking. don't advocate for or against or provide aid. So, if there's an applicant, you probably shouldn't be, giving them money or giving them, social media posts or anything like that, on a project. As staff, I think we talked about that earlier. Staff is here to help you if you have questions on the project. Hey, I don't know about XYZ, can you look into that for me? And to the question on time, routed through the liaisons, we, either myself or other staff will say, hey, that's a little bit too much. Make the ask if you need the help, and then, as much as staff can, they will try to get you that information. Make decisions on the administrative record, the staff report, the attachments to it. That is what you should be making your statements, your findings on, not, I saw them at this restaurant and they did this or that, because if these things ever go to court, it needs to be based on what is the record, what did all the commissioners have in their hands to make a decision on. That's the requirement. Avoid the appearance of bias, pay attention, and above all, you'll be judged by your fairness and integrity. People are watching, so do your best, be fair, have integrity. Couple quick hypos. A planning commissioner rents an apartment, it's a month-to-month basis. They're next to a property whose owner is seeking a variance to build a home that will interfere with their ocean views. The commissioner opposed the variance application, either they wrote a letter or appeared before the zoning administrator, who then approved it. The person who lost the variance, before the administrator has now appealed, and the matter is before the commission on which planning commissioner Brown sits. Can they hear that item?
No.
Good job. No. So this isn't, this is several different reasons. It's not affecting their financial impacts because they're a renter, it's month to month, but it's that common law doctrine of bias. They can't be a neutral decision maker when they have that much involvement, and they clearly dislike the project. Their views are gone. Due process concerns, bias, lack of impartiality, personal private stake in the outcome. I think we have one more hypo. A planning commissioner wrote a blog post stating that a controversial development proposal would impact critical wildlife habitat and important views in the community. Can Commissioner Jones participate?
Yes. No. Yes.
The answer is no. They have clearly shown a bias against the project ahead of time.
We get all lawyer on you, that's the Rickson Billiards case, and you can't.
We can talk about it after.
If you're talking about a council member having opinions before the election versus who we're talking about advocating.
The council member can even be the appellant and still decide. Let's not bore the rest of these folks with this.
We'll be safe.
What's the timing on this? For example, today the lights are out on the highway. And so somebody puts on the blog, the lights are out in Point Doom. And I go, that sucks. How long does that sucks bias me from being able to hear a light getting a battery bill?
This is a bar exam question. You'd probably be okay saying that sucks. Case by case basis, if you have a question, should I recuse on this? Ask us. Again, also, if you write, if there's a piece of art that's getting put in here, Arts Commission says, I'm gonna do that, or it's on their agenda, as a planning commissioner, you can say that art sucks, that's not your commission. So there's that line again about the different commissions, yes.
What are the ramifications for not recusing yourself?
If the city gets sued, in extreme cases, there can be personal liability. Generally, the city may cover you. It really depends, so you always have to be careful. If you step too far out of the lines, the city gets sued, there's gonna be legal costs there. And if you've gone far beyond what's allowed, the city may not be able to cover your legal costs. That's one of them. Publicity, public records requests, all the stuff that a fair amount of you deal with here and there.
And invalidate the decision.
And it can, yes, invalidate the decision. If a court finds that there was improper bias, they could cancel it, they could make the city start from scratch, they could make you recuse yourself, those type of things. Yes.
On financial disclosure, you don't have to disclose anything outside of the city.
That is correct.
If you had somebody have a financial relationship with someone appearing before you, whether it's in the city or not.
Yes, but on the real property, Yes.
Or stock investments and things like that.
No.
Yes, Trevor's correct. If you have stock in Boeing and they're building a factory here and you're
No, I
gonna,
meant they're building a factory in Seattle, not here. You don't disclose your own goal.
You're only disclosing
No.
if there's a financial interest in the project
here.
proposed before you.
yeah.
Well, I'm
So,
talking about the Form 7.
Oh, Form 700?
You would disclose if you had Tesla stock, if Tesla has a retail center in Malibu, you would disclose that.
and there's a little gray area, but yes, generally, more disclosure is the way we recommend. If Tesla has a store here, then yes, you would want
And
to.
if you've had financial dealings or worked for the applicant,
If their salary, anything like that. If you work for the applicant, again,
in the past.
They'd be a financial source.
yeah,
So that would go in your recusal as a planning commissioner?
it could, yes, absolutely.
If there's a project and it has something that we're on record deliberating whether or not, this basement is safe, and then we agree that the project is okay because we're in building and safety, and it goes to building and safety and they approve it, and then it turns out it wasn't safe and there's a fire and 17 people die, are we in some way liable and we could be part of the lawsuit as commissioners?
I mean, we're not going to go into individual projects, that sounds very individually, specific, but
If we pass something that turns out
But
it was
in
egregious
general,
safety violation.
in general, no, if you've made the findings, it's the city is making the decision, it's not you personally.
We're not guaranteeing the safety of people's projects, you know, we're just evaluating whether the findings can be made for, under our code to allow it to be built. They make the decision about whether they want to actually build it, and they're responsible for, you know, the safety.
What if there's an interpretation that says you should, you have to consider a published interpretation of the city?
We've already gone through interpretations, that's separate.
Can we get back to the Brown Act class
Oh,
and not the
oh.
planning commission class?
Yeah.
So, I'm serious, I mean, some of us, we work.
100%, yeah, so we're gonna.
We can submit questions after.
100%.
Okay.
Likewise, you're gonna get this in an email, you're gonna get your liaisons in an email. If you have questions, one, Brown Act rules, individually to Trevor and myself, not to your commission as a whole, or send them to your liaison, one person, that'd be great.
And if you do need to leave, make sure you signed it. Yeah, you're right.
What's that?
Let me get through the slides, and we'll take questions.
Yeah.
Sounds good, yeah, we're almost done. Gifts, so a gift is anything of value that provides a personal benefit for which adequate consideration means compensation. So if you haven't paid for it, either through actual money or through doing work for them or some other form of compensation, that's what a gift is. You have to disclose gifts over $50 on your Form 700s and whatnot. You are disqualified from hearing an item where a person or an entity has given you $630 in a 12-month period. And you are not allowed to take, so you must refuse gifts over $630 from that person or that entity.
In the calendar.
In the calendar year, yes. You can do refunds to get away from breaking these rules, those are all exceptions. Bottom line, watch your calendar, 12 months, estimate, track, disclosures, if you get a gift from, not me, but someone else, $25, bucket of candy, and then you get another 25, you've now hit your $50, you gotta disclose, it's not in one lump sum. Special exceptions, there can be family exceptions, there can be emergency situations, call us. That is the end of it. So, I'm gonna say, if you need to leave, now is a great time to do it, you've done it, questions will be here.
If you haven't signed in though, please sign in before you leave.
Please sign
Is
in.
that 12 months on both, or calendar year on one and 12
Calendar
months on
years,
the other?
calendar space, 12 months.
All these are calendar.
This is for the Form
That's
700
not a
filing,
wrong
which is our planning
It's not a
commission.
moving, no, calendar.
Prohibitions,
Do you need a note, Josh?
No, I'll be okay, thank you.
Watch out for that tripod.
So it is wrong.
You gotta do it.
Around the corner in the kitchen.
On the disqual.
Yep. All right, any questions, anybody? Everyone's free to go if you want to stay around and ask questions, go.
Okay, the general plan of the municipal code. So, do all commissions have to consider the general plan, or planning commission only?
Well, the general plan's a guidance document, it's a
But
policy
it's part of
document.
it's part of the code.
It's
It's more than a guidance document.
It is a guidance document implemented through our municipal code. So if you're gonna try to turn a project down, or you have to identify a provision in the municipal code that would justify it. You can't, because there's a lot of policies in the general plan, and some can conflict with each other in particular situations. And so you can't just pick a policy out of the general plan and say, because of this, I'm turning it down. You have to be able to use that, extract it, and use the municipal code.
Yeah, well, my question is, do other commissions consider that or just?
I mean, if the council sends them a project, like a legislative item, or they want them to weigh in, they could potentially do it. But it generally comes into play for legislation, because any legislation you pass and municipal code that we're going through needs to, be consistent with the general plan. That's a finding the council had to make.
For the planning commission, should commissioners express their concerns prior to opening the public hearing?
What, if you have questions?
Concerns or questions?
Yeah.
Concerns.
Concerns and questions are two different
Yeah,
things.
if you have an opinion about the project, you should
Not
hear it.
Questions that remain after they've heard, like, say, the staff presentation.
Yeah, if you have questions and you're like, well, what's the story on this, or, where's the bluff edge, where's, the setback? Ask those questions before the public hearing so everyone can weigh in on them. So if it's informational, yes. If you're like, oh, I'm really worried about whether I can approve this project, no, you don't wanna make your decision on that. You want everyone to go provide the evidence, and then you're gonna make your decision about that. No deliberations beforehand, but informational questions. Please get those out before the public hearing.
Okay.
So could you elaborate on one of the items, I think it was about 6 slides ago, about fairness? It said that the commissioner should not make any statements before the close of the hearing. Oh, there we go, right there.
Yeah.
Second item, avoid statements before the close of a hearing.
Yes, you shouldn't make an opinion, like this project is awesome and we should go approve it until you've heard all the evidence. That's what it means.
Okay, so hearing is,
The hearing is the public is speaking, and then that's closed, and then you wanna have your deliberation.
oh, perfect, yeah, thank you, that makes sense.
Okay. Yes.
Do you think it would be wise to have separate one of these for planning commission? I know everybody's short on time, but it seems like that came up a lot.
It's the hardest
Maybe a
question.
therapy session.
I think it's planning is the
But it would
hardest
be,
one.
I mean,
We could
it's,
discuss.
maybe, yeah, we'll discuss, maybe.
Yeah, if we have more
It's a very
questions,
important commission.
we're happy to have additional, training or anything. Yeah.
I have during planning.
Well, I think it's different than, because they are approving projects.
Yes.
Where the other commissions really are
Recommend
Advice.
Advisory.
Yes.
Except for the mobile homes, they're also gonna have
Right.
Yeah,
as a judicial.
could be good. Has that ever happened in the city where just the planning commission has had one of these kind of think tanks?
Well, we used to do this training specifically for the planning commission, then we expanded it to include all the commissions.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay. Any other, yes?
I think that for the planning commission, you guys should have something that is read about questions before you guys start the public comment, right? Cause I'm just saying that's come up a lot since we've been in here.
Say
Like-
again.
like, You know how you say, okay, now we're opening up for commissioner comments, now we're opening up for public comments. To have something where you say, okay, this is the time for commissioners to have any questions.
Oh, yeah.
Are there any questions about the project?
That happens.
Oh, that's already part of your thing?
Yeah.
Oh, then why,
Good.
okay.
That's during each individual applicant's portion.
Yeah,
Yeah, that does happen.
okay. Well, sorry, that's been a big debate in here, so.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions, so thank you all for coming.
Thank
Sorry
you.
we ran
Thank you
long.
so much,
you.
guys.
Thank you for coming.
If we have review, if we have review questions,